Hey everybody, this video is called The Tribe's Idolatry, and tonight we're going to continue our pass-through study here in the book of Judges, where we're looking at the 18th chapter, and we're going to be looking at the idolatry from the tribe of Dan. So Judges chapter 18 verse 1 and 2 says, "In those days there was no king in Israel, and in those days the tribe of the Danites was seeking an inheritance for itself to dwell in. For until that day their inheritance among the tribes of Israel had not fallen on them. So the children of Dan sent 5 men of their family from the territory, men of valor from Zorah and Eshtaol, to spy out the land and search it. They said to them, 'Go search the land.' So they went to the mountains of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and lodged there. So the tribe of Dan had land appointed to them, but they found their own land too hard to conquer." In the last video, we looked at the story of compromise and self-will, carnality in the lives of a few individuals. And today, we're looking at how these individual sins would go on to affect the entire tribe of wicked and rebellious people against God. And the Danites, they came to the land from the tribe of Ephraim in the house of Micah. In verse 3 through 6 it says, "And they were at the house of Micah. They recognized the voice of the young Levite. They turned aside and said to him, 'Who brought you here? What are you doing in this place? What do you have here?' He said to them, 'Thus and so Micah did for me. He has hired me, and I have become his priest.' So they said to him, 'Please inquire of God, that we may know whether the journey on which we go will be prosperous.' And the priest said to them, 'Go in peace. The presence of the Lord be you on your way.' So the spies either knew the Levite or picked up recognizing his accent from the southern part of Judea. And these Danites were on a sinful mission, and they met with a sinful Levite and wanted to inquire from the righteous God if their mission would be successful. And this passage doesn't say if the Levite did in fact seek God's counsel before giving the reassurance. And the Danites should have prayed to God's counsel before making this trip of consulting a disobedient priest, as one would an oracle. And we see though that the Levite priests sending men on their way with putting a blessing on them. In verse 7 through 10 it says, "So the 5 men departed and went to Laish. They saw the people who were there, how they dwelt safely in the manner of the Sidonians, quiet and secure. There were no rulers in the land who might put them to shame for anything. They were far from the Sidonians, and they had no ties with anyone. Then the spies came back to their brethren at Zorah and Eshtaol, and their brethren said to them, 'What is your report?' So they said, 'Arise, let us go up against them, for we have seen the land, and indeed it is very good. Would you do nothing? Do not hesitate to go and enter to possess the land. When you go, you will come to a secure people and a large land, for God has given it into your hands, a place where there is no lack of anything that is on the earth.'" So Laish is also known as Lashem, which we looked at back a couple months ago in the book of Joshua 19:47. And it was a secluded, rich land. And the Danites, they found a colony of the Sidonians, who God called Israel to drive them out of the land of Canaan that we looked at back in Joshua 13 verse 4. And Charles Spurgeon, he once preached a sermon on today's chapter called "The Danger of Carnal Security," as he went to preach on warning against the false security of carnal believers. And you know, that's one of the things that I'm not afraid to step toes on, that you know, we need to examine ourselves, see if we're really in the faith. You know, if we're living like the devil 6 days out of 7, we're just weekend warriors for Christ, then, we have to really look, are we truly in the faith? But Charles Spurgeon, in that sermon, he uses the Sidonians as an illustration. In verse 11 through 13, it says, "And 600 men of the family of the Danites went from there, from Zorah and Eshtaol, armed with the weapons of war. Then they went up and camped in Kirjath Jearim in Judah. Therefore they call the place Mahana Dan to this day. There it is, west of Kirjath Jearim. And they passed from there to the mountains of Ephraim, and came to the house of Micah." So we see that they assembled the army of 600 men to go fight for the city of Laish in the land of Ephraim. In verse 14 through 18 says, "Then the 5 men who had gone to spy out of the country of Laish answered and said to their brethren, Do you know that there are in these houses an ephod, household idols, a carved image, and a molded image? Now therefore consider what you do." So they turned aside and came to the house of the young Levite man, to the house of Micah, and greeted him. The 600 men, armed with their weapons of war, who were of the children of Dan, stood at the entrance of the gate. Then the 5 men who had gone out to spy the land went up. Entering there, they took the carved image and ephod, the household idols, and the molded image. The priest stood at the entrance of the gate with 600 men who were armed with weapons of war. When these went into Micah's house and took the carved image, the ephod, and the household idols, and the molded image, the priest said to them, "What are you doing?" So on their way to Laish, the army took Micah's shrine for themselves, and they literally chose violence and theft to advance a religious cause, and the priests allowed them by standing aside as they did so. In verse 19 through 21 says, "And they said to him, Be quiet, put your hand over your mouth, and come with us, be a father and a priest to us. Is it better for you to be a priest to the household of one man, or that you be a priest to the tribe and a family in Israel?" So the priest's heart was glad, and he took the ephod, the household idols, and the carved image, and took his place among the people. Then they turned and departed, and put the little ones, the livestock, and the goods in front of them. So the Levite goes with the tribe of Dan's army as he's threatened to stop objecting or be attacked. And the Levite did not care about Micah, but they only cared about the pay and status that they might receive for the whole tribe instead of a family. In verse 22 through 24 says, "And when they were a good way from the house of Micah, the men who were in the houses near Micah's house gathered together and overtook the children of Dan. And they called out the children of Dan. So they turned around and said to Micah, What ails you that you have gathered such a company? So he said, You have taken away my gods, which I have made, and the priest, and you have gone away. Now what more do I have? How can you say to me, What ails you?" So Micah's foolish idolatry comes to nothing, as he had to rescue his own gods, who should have been able to rescue themselves if they were truly gods. And his idolatry is empty. In verse 25-26 says, "And the children of Dan said to him, Do not let your voice be heard among us, lest angry men fall upon you, and you lose your life with the lives of your household." Then the children of Dan went their way, and when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and went back to his house. So the army of the tribe of Dan refused to give Micah back his God. So we see that Micah goes on empty-handed. And we see the lawlessness in Israel in this long period of time of the book of the Judges. And they were too strong for Micah. In verse 27 through 29 says, "So they took the things Micah had made, and the priests who belonged to him, and went to Laish, to a people quiet and secure, that they struck them with the edge of the sword, and burned the city with fire. There was no deliverer, because it was far from Sidon, and they had no ties with anyone. It was in the valley that belongs to Beth Rehob, and they rebuilt the city and dwelt there. And they called the name of the city Dan, after the name of Dan their father, who was born to Israel. However, the name of the city formerly was Laish. So we see the army from the tribe of Dan conquers the city, and they remove the name and they replace it with Dan. And Dan becomes the most notable city in the northern part of Israel. In verse 30-31 wraps up the chapter. It says, "Then the children of Dan set up for themselves the carved image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan, until the day of the captivity of the land. So they set up for themselves Micah's carved image, which he had made all the time that the house of God was in Shiloh." So some manuscripts will use sons of Manasseh, and others will use the sons of Moses here. And it may be more probable as Gershom as of the son of Moses, as Exodus 2:22 and Exodus 18 verse 3 spells out. And this idolatrous priestly service would go on to continue until the captivity. And when we talk about captivity here, it's most likely speaking of the captivity of Israel by Assyria that came, a few hundred years after in 722 BC, as we'll look at more in 2 Kings. And it's possible by the Philistine captivity of the ark from Shiloh. And the ark of God was far away from them. So they justified their idolatry by their distance from the rest of Israel. And this caused perpetual idolatry for many generations. And this was the beginning of established idolatry in the Promised Land as a community rather than specific individuals. And so to wrap up the video today, we look at Dan spying out Laish as the tribe sends spies to look for land to take among the people of Israel. And we saw that the Danites met with Micah's Levites. And we saw that the Danites chose a city for expansion known as Laish. And we see them assemble an army to take possession of it. And we see that the chapter ends speaking of how the tribe of Dan adopts Micah's idolatry as they go on to take Micah's shrine for themselves. And that's going to wrap up today's video. And this upcoming week, we're going to hit a very interesting part of the book of Judges where we're going to look at Gibeah's crime. And it's very gruesome. So I hope you have a great rest of your night. God bless. And have a great rest of your weekend.